So first,
Hey, sorry to interrupt there. For online, we're only primarily able to see your speaker notes there on the screen.
Okay,
So I don't know
let's
if you're able
see.
to change the view. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I will likely not be able to figure that out, but let's try. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey!
Thank you.
All right. There's always technical glitches here. All righty, we'll jump back in. So first, an agenda slide. We'll provide a bit of an overview as to what PFAS are. Then we'll get into key sources with a focus on our context here in Canada. We'll get into the status of environmental regulations, also with the focus on Canada, but kind of going into some other jurisdictions. Then we'll go into a high-level overview of PFAS accumulation in food sources, and then some considerations for those involved in the food protection kind of realm. Let's see. Okay, so my little clicker is not working, but this thing is also not working. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Let's try this. Okay, perfect. Okay, so first an overview in terms of what PFAS are, yeah, and why there's so much interest in them. Okay, so the abbreviation PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and refers to a class of human-made fluorinated chemicals. There isn't really a formal definition for PFAS, but the US EPA has classified over 4,000 chemicals as belonging to this group. PFAS chemicals share a common structure. Specifically, there's a fluorinated carbon tail attached to a functional group head. So that kind of looks like the hungry caterpillar feature there. The carbon fluorine bonds of the tail make the PFAS extremely strong and water repellent, while the head of the chemical is hydrophilic, meaning it's attracted to water. Let's see if I can get this done. Sorry. These unique properties have made PFAS highly useful since the mid-20th century, where they were introduced in many applications, including but not limited to heat and stain resistant applications or coatings for fabrics, furniture, and cookware, food packaging, electrical insulation, and also they're used as fluorosurfactants, so chemicals that mix water and oil in different applications like firefighting foams for flammable liquid fires, chromium plating facilities, and photolithographic applications, so like the manufacture of computer chips and semiconductors. Two of the most widely known PFAS are perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS, which are shown here. These have historically been used in many industrial applications, and in the field of toxicology, these are the most extensively studied PFAS. Most commercial labs can only analyze for around 40 to 50 PFAS, so this represents about 1% of the total PFAS that exists. So, okay. Yeah, and so as a result, so environmental standards currently exist for only a few of these chemicals because it takes years of toxicology research to kind of build up a decent data bank that regulators can then use to develop standards and guidelines. So given these challenges, governments, including Canada, are now moving towards a class-based approach to PFAS management, meaning they're looking at PFAS as a group of chemicals as opposed to looking at individual chemicals like on a one-by-one basis. And I'll elaborate more on this here shortly. So why all the concern about these chemicals? So first, PFAS are everywhere as they've been used in countless everyday products for decades. Second, they are persistent, meaning that once released into the environment, they don't break down or they slowly break down. Thirdly, they are highly mobile, meaning they travel long distances once introduced into soil and water. So groundwater plumes, for example, can extend many kilometers in spatial extent. And these chemicals are also subject to long-range atmospheric transport. So there's very few ecosystems in the planet now where they have not been detected. And the next point here is that PFAS accumulate in the tissues of living organisms, which is especially relevant to today's discussion on food and public health. And finally, there's a growing body of evidence from human and animal studies that PFAS exposure to basically animals and humans can contribute to a range of health effects. Several of which are shown here in purple and include immune disease, cancer, and reproductive effects. So while we're still working to determine which of these outcomes are the most critical and the levels of exposures are truly protective, there's generally a broad agreement that PFAS poses risks that need action. So I want to quickly overview some of the key PFAS sources in Canada that should be on the radar for public health officials and people kind of interested with PFAS in food. There are many possible sources, but two stand out, at least from my perspective, my work experience. So in Canada, the most significant point sources for PFAS contamination is aqueous film-forming foams used for fighting flammable liquid fires. So common sites that have used AFFF for training and emergencies include military bases, airports, and bulk fuel facilities. And this figure below comes from a 2018 Royal Military College of Canada publication where they assessed airports and military sites across Canada where PFAS contamination was likely or there's a high potential for it. And so I think you can see it does a pretty good job of demonstrating that there's a pretty broad array of sites. So white, I think, is likely and gray is where there's potential. And just in Western Canada, there's 175 sites where PFAS contamination is believed. So at these sites, it's not uncommon to find very high concentrations in soil and water. And the second key source is landfills and wastewater treatment plants that handle our waste. So PFAS containing waste is sent to landfills where the PFAS basically is leached from our garbage and debris through rainwater or groundwater that percolates through the waste. So leachate, this resulting water or leachate contains very high concentrations of chemicals. Most municipalities then direct this leachate to our wastewater treatment plants for treatment. Or if it's an older landfill, the leachate can just basically, if it's an older landfill without a liner, basically the groundwater, the leachate can permeate down into the groundwater. PFAS also enters wastewater systems through everyday use products in our homes, and the associated chemicals make their way down our drains and toilets. The challenge with this is that wastewater treatment plants that receive municipal wastewater and these chemicals aren't just designed to destroy PFAS. These chemicals are persistent, and as a result, they end up into one of two waste streams. They end up in the sludge, which is sometimes eventually converted to biosolids and then might be used as a land amendment, or they make their way into the water stream that is then kind of basically released into the water downstream of our cities. And so while I'm classifying our municipal infrastructure as a source, it's actually you and I and the materials that we use in our kind of day-to-day that are the sources of these chemicals. So whereas for AFFF sites, I highlighted high concentrations, for wastewater treatment plants, I'm emphasizing high loading. And what I mean by that is the actual concentrations of PFAS in the water might be relatively low, but as millions of liters of wastewater are released from each of these wastewater treatment plants a day, that results in a relatively cumulatively high load. And so the example I give here is like a chemical X at a concentration of 1 microgram per liter or 1 part per billion. And if you look at maybe a standard wastewater treatment plant that releases 15,000 liters of water a year, that would equate to around 15 kilograms of one respective chemical. So that's one wastewater treatment plant. And when you think of all the wastewater treatment plants that we have in our receiving waters, that's relatively a large cumulative load. And then when you think of these chemicals being bioaccumulative, that's why you start to see issues with their accumulation in higher trophic levels. So the southern resident killer whale population is one particularly vulnerable population from the accumulation of these persistent organic pollutants. So it's a little bit of an interesting kind of detour. I'll get back on track here. So I'll now shift to some policy and regulation. This growing understanding of PFAS behavior and risk is what's now driving new standards across different media, as well as recent efforts to restrict or phase out PFAS in our supply chains. So since PFAS first came to attention a couple of decades ago, the main concern has been and continues to be PFAS in drinking water. We're protecting our drinking water supplies. This is where most regulations started, basically developing standards to protect people from ingesting contaminated water. There's still no universal agreement on what level is safe. Different jurisdictions are using different approaches, but most standards are now in the parts per trillion levels. So for illustration, 1 part per trillion is equal to 1 drop in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So we're working with very low thresholds. And so some of these numbers are so low, or these thresholds are so low that they're kind of pushing the limits of what a laboratory can actually detect. And as you can imagine, for people in the sphere of trying to clean up contamination, it's kind of pushing the limits in terms of what's actually possible. Can you actually achieve these numbers? And as I'm about to get into standards, I'd like to kind of start off by sharing some of the behind the scenes. There's a lot of controversy behind some of the guidelines. So we've seen some governments issue very conservative thresholds that some say are overly precautionary. And then we're seeing others promoting less stringent thresholds that are more in line with kind of what's practical to achieve. So a good example of this is the controversy surrounding the World Health Organization's 2020 draft or interim standards that were kind of highly criticized. So there was a standard of 100 part per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. And as per this kind of Guardian article, there was a lot of pushback on those criteria not being overly stringent, and they basically pulled them. But let's start with what's happening here in Canada, where there's been a lot of activity at the federal level for the last in the last year or so. So Health Canada recently released a new drinking water quality objective based on the sum concentration of 25 PFAS compounds. So this is a shift towards regulating PFAS as a group, as opposed to developing standards for individual PFAS chemicals. And so that approach is kind of like a means by which it would take decades to kind of like, develop standards for each of these individual chemicals, if not maybe multiple decades. But this approach is kind of allows us to develop some more precautionary criteria that can kind of be put into effect much sooner. And then you can see numerous guidelines for soil and water for individual PFAS parameters developed by Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment and select provinces. An important point to make here with all these criteria is that they're protective of direct effects from exposure, but they're not looking at PFAS accumulation in food items. And I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I do want to highlight some of the Government of Canada's broader strategy for managing PFAS. So as I've alluded to, again, they're moving towards a class-based approach. And a good example of this, again, is those Health Canada drinking water criteria, which is the sum of multiple PFAS chemicals. And they're also phasing in bans and prohibitions, starting with phasing out most PFAS in firefighting foams. And they're starting to track which PFAS are being used in the Canadian economy to better understand the scale of the issue. This is something that the food and beverage industry sectors should pay particular attention to, since food packaging materials may fall within these reporting requirements. And the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has issued an interim standard of 50 parts per billion for PFOS for biosolids imported or sold in Canada. So this criteria pertains to a single PFAS parameter and is intended to provide a risk control measure for food and feed crops grown in Canada. And this interim standard may have implications for those working in agriculture or waste management. However, the CFIA notes that at least 92% of Canadian biosolids would pass this threshold. While Canada does not yet have food standards for PFAS, other jurisdictions have developed some criteria. So the first was the Food Standards Australia New Zealand Statutory Authority that developed some of these target limits for PFAS back in 2017. So these are not maximum allowable levels, rather they're screening values to help the authority determine if corrective actions or protective actions need to be put in place to protect human exposures. As shown here, there are thresholds based on the combined concentrations of 3 PFAS. So we have PFOS, PFOA, and perfluorohexane sulfonates, or PFHXS. And these apply to fish, seafood, livestock products, and fruits and vegetables. Australia is a neat case where they're dealing largely with AFFF contamination, where the products they were using primarily had these 3 PFAS. So Canada, we've had different AFFF products in use, so it's a little bit more of a complex story for us. The European Union has maximum allowable levels of PFAS in food products that are produced or shipped in the EU. And it might be difficult to see, but many of these thresholds pertain to fish. Unfortunately, there have been numerous studies citing not insignificant concentrations of PFAS in commercially sold seafood, with lots of variability depending on the country and waters of seafood origin. And I also understand that in the near future, the EU is expected to introduce regulated limits for PFAS in animal feed, aimed at protecting food chain and reducing bioaccumulation risks. In North America, there's been much less regulatory focus on PFAS in food, but one good example is the state of Maine that's dealing with contamination to agricultural fields and fallow fields from historical biosolid applications. The state has developed numerous screening criteria and action levels for PFOS in specific food products, including fish tissue, milk, and beef. And they also have some soil criteria at the bottom that consider bioaccumulation from soil and uptake to hay and silage, and then to milk. I'll now shift to a high-level overview of the main variables, or some of the main variables that affect how PFAS are taken up by plants and animals, and some general trends. Okay, so there are several factors, starting with the PFAS themselves. The chain length and the functional group affect how easily PFAS enter an organism's tissues, where they accumulate, and how quickly they are eliminated from the organism. In animals, dietary exposure is typically the dominant pathway, while plant uptake mainly occurs through water. Longer chain PFAS, those with 8 or more fluorinated carbons, tend to bioaccumulate more and are eliminated more slowly in animals, whereas shorter chain PFAS with 7 carbons or less are more readily water soluble, and they move more easily through plant tissues and into the roots and distributing amongst plant tissues. Let's see here. Let's see. Yeah, PFAS preferentially bind with proteins over lipids, accumulating in blood, liver, and kidneys rather than fatty tissues. Generally, PFAS accumulate more readily in animals and plants. Because PFAS bioaccumulate, organisms higher in the food chain often show higher concentrations than lower trophic levels, such as their prey. And finally, they can be eliminated in livestock through egg and milk production, which lowers levels in the adult livestock, but transfers PFAS to offspring or to people who may consume these products. For this last bullet, I'm going to refer to a publication that my coworker, Tara Hagen out of Australia in our SLR's Melbourne office was involved with, where they conducted a review of PFAS studies in livestock and wild game. So some of the key findings from that publication was basically there's relatively limited study in this realm, but the study that is available is largely focused on PFOA and PFOS. So again, two PFAS of the thousands that are out there. And those studies were largely looking at contaminated water, soil, and animal feed. They found PFAS levels were typically lower and more in the more readily consumed tissues, like milk and eggs, rather than the offal, such as the liver and blood tissues. And to the point of my previous slide, PFAS can transfer from adult livestock to offspring and food products, and to food products as well. And encouragingly, PFAS levels can decline once exposure stops. So for example, PFOS in cow's milk has been cited as having a half-life of about 56 days once exposure ceases. And water water exposure studies with chickens found PFAS levels in eggs can drop by half in under a week once clean water is provided. So I'll kind of wrap up with a few key considerations for those that are working in the public health and food protection space with an interest in better understanding kind of the risk from these chemicals. Again, these are kind of centric to a consultant and my field, but hopefully there's still some items that can be taken here. So first, really take the time to understand the nuances of the situation you're dealing with. If there are concerns with respect to PFAS in food, develop a clear conceptual site model that defines the source area or where these PFAS might be coming from, the types of PFAS involved, and that identifies all the possible routes that PFAS could basically enter the food that you're interested in. Uh, Knowing that PFAS, also know that PFAS detections in soil and water doesn't necessarily mean they're accumulating in plant or animal tissues or your food sources. There are many possible ways by which one can estimate possible bioaccumulation from soil and water, but each of these approaches has its own uncertainties. So in light of that, it may be advisable for you to actually sample tissues to actually see what's kind of going on. Keep in mind that PFAS sources and as a result, its presence is relatively widespread. And so should you have detections of PFAS in a respective media, it might not necessarily be linked to one individual source. So for example, you might be interested in potential contamination to livestock from an AFFF site, but you'd also have to maybe consider, has biosolids been applied to the field in the past, or is there potentially PFAS in the animal feed itself? So these projects may require some forensics to confirm the sources. When you have detected concentrations in food, you can look at those tissue thresholds that I've cited on previous slides, but it may be preferable or even required that you actually evaluate daily doses or what people may be exposed to and compare those to toxicity reference values developed by Health Canada or other jurisdictions. So with this meaning more so you're probably completing a more formal human health risk assessment. And my last point is that we are seeing a significant emphasis in the environmental field on the protection of Indigenous food harvesting and country foods, which is being led by the Indigenous governments themselves. So protecting country foods is stimulating a lot of interesting dialogue and action regarding these persistent organic pollutants. And it's going to probably result in a lot of kind of difficult and challenging conversations in the future. As we continue to kind of grapple with how do we handle these chemicals that are, in our regional and global kind of supply chains. So that is the presentation. Hopefully there was something useful in there and interesting. Thank you for listening. And I'll just kind of flash up this last slide here, and this my contact information and Michelle's as well. Should you have any inquiries, feel free to shoot us a line, and we're always happy to kind of field any inquiries. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks. So happy to answer or speak to any points or questions. Yes, sir.
The presentation, I also understand that there is no maximum limit in noise extent. Well, I also know, is it legal tools that have been like determined? Is it like an old if you see?
Yeah.
These people.
I mean, I don't, that's a great question. I wouldn't know off the top of my head about that. But there's definitely a lot of debate in terms of how we're currently looking at, like basically the indices by which we're looking at, like what is an adverse effect, versus, that's kind of the crux of the matter. It's really coming down to what are the metrics we're looking at. There's some that are saying what's being currently used is overly conservative, and we should be using something that's more consistent with what's been done for other chemicals. So it's a kind of like a tornado of kind of stuff happening in the background with regulators, but Yeah, good question, but I don't know that off the top of the head. Okay, thanks. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that's true. Okay, thank you for the presentation. And you mentioned that the biodegradability of PFAS is kind of problematic. So like, yeah, very low. Yeah. So I would like to ask that are there some innovative solutions that are ongoing to improve that? Maybe that could help lower the environmental risk. Degradability, degradability, yeah, that's what I mean. Yes.
To me, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, so there's many that are like working on these technological solutions, and you're totally right. It has to come down to like breaking these chemicals down. But it's kind of like moving past like, well, what is the issue? We created a chemical, that can't be destroyed, or like it's very like resistant to degradation in the natural environment. And now we're kind of throwing technological solutions at it, as opposed to really kind of like, well, should we be making these chemicals? I'm gonna go off on my hippie tangent here now, but like it's it's like we just can't continue to look to technology for these. But I mean, yes, people are looking at technology. They are starting to try to destroy these chemicals, but it's just like it's such a large issue. And I mean, now they're everywhere, right? So it's kind of we definitely need technological solutions in the near term, but hopefully we're kind of learning some lessons from this experiment. We haven't, because we've done this before with other chemicals, but hopefully it's going to get better. Yeah, great question. Yeah. Oh yeah. Back.
So, related question. You did show though that uh, over time, when exposure ceases, levels in tissues decrease quickly. Is that elimination or is that metabolism?
Uh, Yeah, I think what that is showing elimination. So I think in livestock it was showing like through feces or urine or through the livestock products like embryos or milk. Um, I don't think there's any metabolizing of these chemicals happening. There might be some relatively like simple breakdown, but you see occasional studies about like phytoremediation or using microbes, but like that carbon fluorine bond is like the strongest bond in like nature. So you're not breaking that thing down. So that's kind of the gist. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
One more. And the toxicological effects, like, so you sort of mentioned a little bit about the thresholds haven't really been well determined. So we're not quite sure what level of exposure is going to lead to a toxic effect and what are the thought to be the main.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a slide here. Let's see if I do have a slide here. Yeah, so this might be kind of like some of the animal studies. So like there's like immune effects and developmental, a lot of work done with like thyroids. Um, so this is a lot of this stuff is admittedly kind of outside of like my wheelhouse, but they're like what's kind of being measured right now is like you're seeing certain signals that are in like the liver or in the kidney that are might be indicative of a problem, but it's not necessarily pertaining to a more traditional health effect. Uh, is that kind of Michelle? That's kind of more or less the gist. So it's the people that are criticizing the current like values that are being put out there are saying there's not really like a consistent approach as to what's been done before with other chemicals like your metals or PCBs or PAHs. It's a little bit more conservative, and I think it's been conservative in light of like how widespread we're seeing this issue to be, and that it's taking years to get adequate information and data. So governments are really leaning towards a very cautious approach. So it's a bit of a divergence from what's kind of traditionally been done. But yeah, there's definitely some good information, good reading on that content, and send me an email and I'll kind of flip some articles your way. Yeah, awesome. Definitely. Yeah.
I had a bunch of little questions. You mentioned that these chemicals have atmospheric transport. So we saw the picture of the wastewater. Does that mean that it can get sucked up like into the clouds and disperse from, say, a dirty area to a clean area?
Yeah. So,
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, there is definitely uptake into into the atmosphere, and then like moving yeah through precipitation to sensitive ecosystems like the Arctic. So other chemicals that you've heard of like DDT, for example, that's the subject to the same kind of patterns and whatnot as well. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
So I think this other question you've already answered, but I'm gonna ask it in a different way. Is there like a half-life? Like, is this like a radioactive thing? Like how long is forever? Question three. Question three. Is this the same stuff that's like on our frying pans? Like California's just banned. Okay. Question four is, what do you cook your food in?
Yeah. It's like these like the chemical stuff has definitely like been a deep dive and a depressing dive into like the amount of chemicals that we use and that we as a society regulate like things based on like concentration, like oh the concentration's low in water. But what I was trying to emphasize with that wastewater story is it's like we're releasing so much chemical and so much volume of it that cumulatively, especially for chemicals like these that just don't degrade, that it builds up. um and then like there's like, not to go on a tangent, but it's like we just have so many chemicals in our modern society, right? So, it's like this is this one chemical, and I showed, that's like 8 kilograms over a year, but then you think of like, thousands of chemicals, right? So it's just something that we as a society just kind of need to kind of have more on our radar and pay a bit more attention to. Yeah, just to say it lightly. But yeah, I mean, in my life, I mean, I'm definitely cognizant of like, I'm what I'm cooking with, like cast iron and stuff for sure. But I mean, I'm also here in a Gore-Tex jacket, right? So that also is like, so, you're, yeah, you're, it's everywhere really. So you do what you can, but yeah, that's it. Kind of a depressing tone to know.
Maybe a little positive. I read something or heard something, I think, in the last day or two about the benefits of donating blood that might relate to something that
Oh yeah. Oh, like in terms of how you get it into your system or something? Oh, there you go. For sure. Yeah, definitely PFAS and blood. It's yeah. I mean, I think most of us, we all probably have it coursing through our veins at very low concentrations, I'm sure. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you can filter out PFAS from drinking water. Because my concern is in rural areas where water is coming from a well, so it's not coming from a full source. How do you ensure to test and also remove it from the water?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the main technology, really. It's the most basic and low cost technology is water filtration. And I think there's relatively, decent, like kind of success with filtration. And so, like, where I was citing those World Health Organization thresholds. So, the author of that publication, that person was kind of citing, like, we think you're being overly stringent with these criteria, and we think a developing nation could achieve these thresholds. So it's kind of, we're in this space where you're looking at like, well, what's actually practical to achieve versus what's the actual impact. So that's kind of a dangerous crux, where it's like, what can we do? And so that's kind of where that discussion's going, is like someone should be able to get to 100 parts per trillion for these two chemicals. But that's it. So yeah, filtration is pretty key and crucial. And but yeah, yeah. Was that kind of?
Is there a particular type of filter?
Yeah, so like activated carbon. Yeah, activated carbon. And then there's like the resin products. There's another resin that you can, yeah, you can absorb you can yeah, exactly. Acquire the PFAS off the resin, melt it down again and use it again. So yeah, but activated carbon is really good. I think there's others that are looking to do kind of like other approaches like activated biochar and stuff like that. So there's stuff out there, but yeah, carbon is always the go-to for sure. Yeah.
Well, like you pointed out, this is something that have always been happening over time in history with different chemicals, asbestos, CFC. Personally, what would be your advice to the scientific and research communities regarding occurrences like this in the future? Yeah, about making these uh, chemicals that can be very toxic on the long term. And, it's just, I've always been over time, reactive solution. And then we close the problem. And then what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? It's like what is like sustainability, right? It's like, is it something that like doesn't degrade, sustainable? But at the same time, too, many people will throw me under the bus for saying like, these chemicals are marvels, right? Like these chemicals we use in our like everyday lives have like made life better for us, arguably, right? Like we're using phones with chemicals that who knows what's going on there. So it's kind of, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It's kind of, yeah, the crux in terms of like, you know, what is sustainability and like what impact are we willing to leave and how ignorant are we willing to be of certain effects? Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the answer to it, but yeah, keep asking it for sure.
Any more? Okay, right. One more question.
Representation. So I have a question for you. This is from one risk assessor to another. I'm wondering, is it gonna be for you to do risk assessments on PFAS in systems? When it's only like screening guidelines for just a couple, like PFAS, PFOA, and then there's a bunch of other ones that don't have any screening guidelines, and then also um in that regard, for example, with PAHs, there's like toxicity equivalents and stuff like that. Do you think that could be a good approach, for use in of chemicals? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, Health Canada just issued, and I was gonna throw the slide up, but I was told by Lindsay Michelle we could share the slide of the new Health Canada TRVs. So they have recently issued more thresholds, I think, for like a dozen or so PFAS. So there are thresholds out there. Um, and I think there is an approach of where it's like the equivalent toxic equivalency kind of factor where previously everything was getting scaled to the one PFOS. And so like, PFHXS is, half as toxic as PFOS. So there was a way that we were kind of scaling, but I think Health Canada has kind of gotten away from that approach and have kind of trying to more so derive individual toxicity reference values for individual PFOS. And yeah, that's something too, where these, like the US EPA has developed theirs. Canada largely kind of has adopted what US does, but I think in this case, they've kind of selected some of those, and in other cases, they've opted to kind of go with their own kind of indices and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's the crux. And in terms of the risk assessment, it's like, yeah, it's going to be very complicated, I think, as we're seeing. Um, like a lot of it comes down to, this like you want to get information from your population in terms of how much food are you ingesting, and some of this has potential to kind of scare people as well, right? It's like you're like getting all the variables and that you need to kind of make these calculations is going to be tricky, and it's going to be subject to uncertainty. But I think we're kind of getting there, and I think it could be done for sure. Yeah. Yep.
Any more questions? Oh, yes, online. You can't forget about online funds.
Yeah, I've got one question here, Jasmine. It's Rhiannon. So it might have been asked already, but we missed online the first couple of questions there. So in the talk, Matthew, you mentioned that PFAS is in the water. It's from wastewater treatment facilities. Is there any currently monitoring and testing going on or surveillance in British Columbia looking at the effluent from wastewater treatment facilities?
I mean, I can't speak to specific projects, but yeah, in yes, I think municipalities like are aware of these issues, are aware of, you know, like they monitor chemicals in their waste. And then I think the province and even the federal government has I think even like publicly available information data that's kind of like from their studies. So yeah, it is yeah, this is testing that is ongoing and they continue to try and get a handle on.
Okay, yeah, no, it's really interesting because, you know, living in the Fraser Valley, most of the water from the wastewater treatment facilities is flowing into the Fraser River. And as we know, it's a habitat for salmon, which a lot of people are fishing and consuming. So the
Mhm.
risk of bioaccumulation is definitely present in this area.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely our receiving waters, yeah, they're kind of the ultimate home for these chemicals. So yeah,
Great, thanks. Nice
so
talk.
thank you. Thanks. All right. Anyone else online? I think that's it. Right on.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for your talk.